Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, this afternoon, or this morning, wherever you are in the world. We've got an amazing lineup for you. We're fantastic panelists, and we're introducing today, I'm introducing Osnat as our moderator for the event, and she's going to kick off with some introductions, I believe. So thank you again for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good night. It's great that you could join us. My name is Osnat Shurer. I'm a producer and executive producer. I currently work at Baobab Studios, overseeing creative, and until recently worked at Disney, where I was lucky enough to get to produce Moana and Raya and the Last Dragon, and for that Pixar, before that documentaries and a lot of live action. So we have a lot of cool stuff to talk about with you this morning. I'm going to do this every time. It's afternoon here for us. And we're going to kick off by each person introducing themselves and just telling you just a little bit about who we are. So Maggie, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Maggie Malone. I am currently a VP of content at Netflix Feature Animation, focusing specifically on the features. I started at Netflix about 2.5 years ago. I actually came over originally to produce a Roald Dahl title, The Twits, which I'm still producing the feature. And also prior to that, worked at Illumination as an executive producer. And prior to that, crossed paths with Osnat at Disney Animation, where worked on pretty much all of the projects from Meet the Robinsons and Bolt all the way through Frozen 2. So it was quite a journey, and have a background in live action TV production, as well as Broadway and off-Broadway lit development. And I also have a 7-year-old who's just home. So this is really exciting. Just to raise the stakes on this panel, she could bust in at any minute, and I have no idea how it's going to go. So watch what happens next. Holly.
Hi everyone. I'm Holly Edwards, president of Skydance Animation. I'm one of those people who actually studied film. I went to school for film, and that's crazy, but I ended up in it. When I was done with school, I went right into being a production assistant in live action commercials and, of course, waitressing. I lived in the Midwest, so it was mostly commercial work, but I started working in live action features when they came into town. That led me to moving to San Francisco, and I accidentally got into animation by applying to a company called Colossal Pictures. They did both live action and animation, and they hired me for animation. Flash forward a few years, and I ended up working in animated features at DreamWorks, their Northern California studio. I spent 15 years at DreamWorks, and that led me to being in LA. And then just over 5 years ago, I left DreamWorks to help start Skydance Animation, which was a new animation division that is part of Skydance Media. And so here I am.
Thank you. Barbara?
Hi everybody. I'm zooming in from Australia in Sydney, and it's morning here. I'm the CEO of Flying Bark, and we have both an animation studio here in Sydney and one in Los Angeles as well. We have primarily produced features in the independent space and the international market for the past 10 years. But we are also developing and working alongside a lot of the studios producing films as a client partner as well. So my background, I've been a producer across sport, live action, lifestyle, factual, scripted, and eventually moved into animation, which I really always say is my home. Because I love the people and the craft of animation, and I'm really looking forward to this panel because there's quite a few of my heroes here alongside me.
Thank you, Sarah. Midnight in the UK.
Hey, and nice to see you all. So I guess I have a foot in every kind of camp because I started in live action as a producer, director in comedy, but I've spent about half my career doing that and then about half of it doing animation. I've been an executive. I was head of development at Aardman Features, and I also founded Locksmith Animation, where I was chief creative officer and responsible for the development and creating the slate. So I've done development from that side, but I've also been a writer-director on 2 of my own films, Arthur Christmas and Ron's Gone Wrong. So I've been both gatekeeper and on the other side. And I've been funded by the LA distributors, by Sony. I've done films at Disney and Netflix and so on. But I've been doing it from a European standpoint as a European producer and filmmaker, and as an independent as well. So I've kind of seen it from all sides and hopefully can speak to any piece of that.
Thank you. Cristina.
Thank you, Osnat. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be part of this panel. And good evening and good morning, everybody, depending on wherever you're connecting from. So I'm Cristina Fiumara. I am the Global Head of Animation Development for Film and TV at Riot Games. Sorry for the mouthful. I am very new in the role, like I've been here for like 3 months. And Riot Games is a video game company behind League of Legends and Valorant, and Arcane is the first high-end series that the company has produced in animation. So we're now starting to enter more and more in entertainment. And prior to Riot Games, I spent 8 years at the Walt Disney Company in various roles, but like the most recent was I was in charge of streaming content at Walt Disney Animation Studios, crossing paths with Osnat and actually working very closely with her on everything being created and produced for streaming, as well as all the movie content. And then prior to that, I was at Disney Plus as the head of animation development, where I really got the chance to work with all the internal studios at the company. Everything that you see animated on Disney Plus, I somehow touched, and I got the luck of touching it. And prior to that, I was actually in Europe, working in international and independent animation in a company called the Zodiac Media Group. And last thing that I'll say is I always wanted to do animation since I was a kid. So for me, this is it's been a long journey, but every step of the way has been a little bit of a dream come true. So
Thank you. Kevin, last but not least.
Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Kevin Noel. I am the Senior Vice President of Creative at Sony Pictures Animation. Started my animation career here at Sony Animation a long time ago. I was brought in to be an assistant on our first movie, Open Season, which was, again, yeah, a long time ago. Worked in production for a long time after that, just going from film to film. And I worked on the Cloudy movies and some of the Smurf movies and Hotel Transylvania. And just kind of made my way up through production. I ended up leaving the company just for a little bit to go produce content at Mattel, the toy company. And so I did that for a little bit before they brought me back here in my executive role. And we've been developing a bunch of fun stuff. It's a really cool place to work. And we obviously still do big 4-quadrant CG movies, but we just started getting into television series as well. Our first one, shameless plug, is Agent Elvis, releasing this Friday on Netflix. We're really excited about that. So it's been fun to get into learning how to do television series as well, because it's not the easiest, but it could also be very, very rewarding. So it's been a fun little journey, and I'm honored to be on this panel with all of these amazing animation minds. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was it, you guys. So thank you so much for, no, I'm totally kidding. So this is us. So I'm going to start with a few questions, and panelists, please just feel free to jump in. And please, if you're watching, feel free to go into the chat and ask questions. We want to hear from you. We'll definitely save some time for questions at the end, but we'll also address them as we go along. And I'm just going to start with some real basics so that we can establish some of the like core questions. So my first question I want to throw out to the panel, please feel free to jump in, is what are the necessary elements in developing a great animated film or series? Like, how do we do this thing? And I'm looking for relatively short answers for those of you who don't know. Animation takes forever, so we can get into talking about it. Our films take 4 or 5 years easily. But what are the basic elements that you look for when you're developing something for animation? And anyone can jump in.
I'll kick it off and I'll say creative vision from a director, like a visionary who will ultimately lead the process and the team to deliver hopefully like a piece of excellent an excellent piece of content. There are a few others, but I want to leave the room for the other panelists to chime in.
I'll jump in as well. I think our projects are very frequently are trying to speak to a multi-generational audience and to be kind of to gather around the hearth that that is the theater or the television. And so we really want something that everyone can enjoy, and they get rewatched a lot. So I'm going to say memorable characters that we want to live with over a long period of time. We do spend a lot of time talking about why animation, why is this an animation? So a different perspective on a world, maybe in a way that we haven't exactly seen before, is also incredibly important. And again, that emotional story needs to feel incredibly grounded, much like an independent film. That might be surprising to you. As we all know, anything can happen in film. But anything can really happen in animation. And so we need to try that much harder to ground the emotion in order to then move you, to make you laugh and to make you cry. That's kind of part of what goes. And then also a certain degree of flexibility in the filmmaking team. Yes, they need vision, but again, these films take 4 or 5 years. And so it's not just this 3-month experience on set. We live with everybody kind of day in and day out. And so there needs to be this kind of willingness for some amount of collaboration.
Holly, you're nodding. I'm sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
A couple of things. Firstly, creatively, for me, it's a big hooky idea. An idea, especially if it's going to be for families, something that I think kids going to, yes, I've always wondered that. I want to know that. I've always imagined that. I want to know what's it about, what's it actually exploring, and what's the ending. And once I know those 3 things, I feel like you can build a film. But just to give an alternative, very technical answer, I had to define in deals that I did with some of the studios who are maybe not so familiar with distributing animation. I had to define what the elements were that we would give them at Greenlight. So in, what was that development package? And to some extent, I wanted to put these things in place for our own protection, because sometimes a distributor will want to greenlight an animated movie based on a script if they are very much live action orientated. The trouble with that is you are so exposed when you start production, you actually haven't done your work. So the elements that we designed, as far as I can remember, we said we would give them a script, we would give some key cast, because generally they want that more than we do at that stage, but they did want that. Some key character designs and some key art and concept designs. You've got to know what the genre of it looks like. We would give them some form of moving imagery, probably an animation test, but it could be a 3D fly through of an environment, something that gives you a sense of what it is in movement, a budget and a schedule, and some key HODs. So, and again, that is something that, I cared more about in a way than necessarily the distributor did, because I knew how hard it is in the independent sector to pick up a cinematographer, a designer. There's just not a freelance pool like there is in live action. And so you have to work on that stuff for a long time before you get to Greenlight. And you have to have that stuff in place. And if you don't, you're in trouble. So that was my package for me and for them, basically.
Someone's asking what was the last thing you mentioned?
Oh, just HOD, so heads of departments. So, I think we defined it as production designer, head of story, didn't have animation at that stage, obviously, because some of that comes, you know, later. You do have time to ramp up to those. So basically the people that you need to start with, editor, you know, the people that you need at the kickoff of the production process, that we said that we would give them approval and that we would put that in the green light package to hold our own feet to the fire and make sure we were ready.
People are taking notes. Someone's asking what the second one was after the script. You have to go back. It was a script and it was art. What was this? Cast, I think, was the second thing.
Cast, character design, concept art, concept design, animation test, moving imagery of some kind, possibly 3D, art development, budget, schedule, and heads of department for the startup.
And just to clarify, this is for the actual green light to go into production. In most cases, most places have amber lights or whatever things they call it, partial light, so that when there's the green light to go to development and then the next phase to go to pilot if it's a series and things like that. And what Sarah's talking about is a really nice, solid package that gets you the funding to actually make a movie. You're going to start spending the big bucks. And I think it's really smart to hold yourself to it as well as what people are expecting from you. I think that's a really smart way to protect yourself.
I think you're going to have to.
I would just add that we basically, I would say almost exactly what Sarah says is what we would aim for, particularly in the independent space, because you really need to be convincing in I think we talk about, is there credibility behind this idea? And credibility can be built from things, connecting with audience, understanding is this relatable. There's some conceptual elements around credibility, but then there's also who is this team and creative vision. For us in animation, it is amazing to have a fabulous, wonderful director, but the process for animation is incredibly iterative, and which means that directors need to almost duplicate themselves, or maybe and so in all that heads of department team, that framework of creative leads is really important. It's not all coming from one central voice, and so we also really put a lot of effort into that, making, is this the right dynamics in the creative team? I think that's a really important part of development for us. And the only other thing I would add is that we also produce a treatment for our screenplays, because often you want to make sure not everyone has time to read a screenplay. We'd love them to. I'd hope that they do, but there's also an opportunity to get someone interested in a way, maybe early on in your development. If you've got a really strong treatment, say this is where this is leading, and we've got a screenplay, and then if someone's kind of interested, because they'll come back and they want to read the screenplay. So that's just another thing that we would add to that toolbox, I guess.
Kevin, Holly, did you want to add anything to this, or should we move on?
I'll just say, yeah, echoing all of those things. I think what was interesting about what Sarah was saying and what Barbara was saying is that for those of you that haven't worked in animation, it's an incredibly iterative process. And so much of it, and so much of our jobs, I think, is also casting that net, like starting with the director or the writer, whoever the creative visionary is, and making sure that person is collaborative and you're surrounding themselves with the best resources. Because if we're doing our jobs right, then it's only going to get better. It'll move forward, maybe go backwards a little bit, but storyboardists are always going to plus things. The visual development's always going to plus things. And that's part of the reason the process is so long, is because so many great minds and hands touch it. And it ends up being the best possible. If you cast the movie right and everybody's collaborative, it ends up being the best possible project you can make. I do think, though, it starts like we try our best to be creative, driven by creators, and so just having somebody that has the key vision, but also like a personal vision or a personal reason to tell the story they want to tell is so important, because you'll always kind of go back to that first meeting of like that. This is the North Star of the movie. This person wanted to tell a story about their family, and it could involve robots or zombies or whatever it is. But the North Star is, if you're always losing your way, it was always supposed to be about, I'm just giving one example, but about this family. That's Mitchell's. Anyway, so yeah.
Just to come back on what you said, Osnat, I think it's maybe worth saying that there are many different sort of styles and disciplines of development across even this panel, because very often development can be a real sliding process, especially within a studio that has an extensive resource and in-house artists, where, you know, a little bit more gets commissioned, whether it is the script and then some more visual development and then let's see some reels, and maybe full production decision isn't made till after the animatic. What I was describing was a way to try and make a kind of hard cutoff, because for an independent producer, it's really important never to get yourself in that situation. You know, most people cannot do that financially. They actually have to have a strong commitment to go that can't be rescinded, to be honest, because for an independent, it's existential. Everything is on the line once you're making that film, and to have it kind of cancelled or go away again, you know, it's just it would be catastrophic. And so you're in a slightly different relationship in a way with that kind of development process, where you are trying to do, as in a live action thing, get to a stage where everyone goes, we're doing it, and off we go.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. Every time I've onboarded a new writer onto a show that comes from live action, they ask me the same question. It's like, so what's the shooting script? And I have to answer that the shooting script is the script that you transcribe from the movie when it's finished during the mix. It's pretty much, that's how much we iterate, because we can, in whatever context one is. But for me, I just moved from a long time at Pixar and Disney into an independent studio, and I can see some of the differences. They're striking. They're really, really striking. I want to talk just a little bit, if you guys are up for it, about developing from finding and developing new projects versus developing an existing IP. There's so much conversation about that now in media, of the kind of everybody just wants to build on existing IP. Where do you fall with that? What interests you when you're looking at one versus the other? Kuri, I know you're building off of existing games, for example. How do you think about that? And then how do others think about originals, or people who are working in both is even more interesting as well?
Yeah, like at Riot, for sure, like we are focusing the entire effort in building off of the existing IP that the company has, so like the video game IP. So there is a need in terms of where to start from, because we have many characters. We have a universe that is, you know, as big as Lord of the Rings or like Game of Thrones in terms of scope. At the same time, and we also have data, right? Like we have data from the game and like the players and so forth. So there are like some obvious choices that are just based on, you know, like we're starting now, like the world is their oyster in a way, and so we know that there are certain characters and certain stories that are already included in the original game that are loved by our players, and so we are tapping into those to start with. But at the same time, we're also looking at you know, characters and storylines that may be a complete surprise and very unexpected for our players and our audiences. And at the same time, we have the challenge of how do we take these characters that are loved by a certain group of people and expand from there, right? And so like you are in this zone where you know that you have hundreds of millions of people who know certain elements about those characters, but there is as many other people who don't. And so you have to figure out a way to hook those other people and ultimately create projects that, yes, tap into the strengths of the IP and into what players love, but that have that still have to live and compete within original content, right? Like you're not playing with the I don't know, like the MCU today after 26 plus movies and I don't even know, like 100 years of comic books. So that's not the situation. And so we are trying to be like really strategic with the choices of the characters. And we are still trying to have a filmmaker-driven approach to the development of each of these characters and storylines. So we know that there are some parameters that our filmmakers will need to play within. But we also want to make sure that everything that gets created that does have a unique voice and a unique vision, because otherwise it's really not gonna stand up next to some of the great content, whether it's IP based or original. So this is kind of how we are approaching it from the get-go. And then there are some complexities in terms of what happens when we actually start to develop, because obviously like there is this universe that has existed for 11 plus years, but the stories are not necessarily connected, and the development of the characters in the game is not always as deep or as complex as what would be expected in the typical narrative space, whether in features or TV series. And we have like over 160 characters, so we kind of have to make sense of what the history of this world and of each one of these characters looks like, and how they intersect and what the threads, like the interwoven threads, are going to be, and what the themes like the common overarching themes of this universe are going to be, and how they will speak to each of like the singular movies or series. And so we are forming our own internal brain trust that really brings together a bunch of folks from all over the company, and definitely folks who have worked on the game, on those characters, on building that world. And we are creating a bridge between those groups and the film and TV group and the filmmakers that we're bringing on board, so that we can have a coherent approach to the world building, to the character building, but also maintain enough room for our filmmakers to bring their voice and their point of view to the forefront. I hope, let me know if this responds to the question.
That's very helpful. I think you covered a lot of topics, and one of the most interesting ones, I think, also is the creation of some sort of a team. I mean, I was lucky enough to be at Pixar with a brain trust and at Disney with the story trust. The power of having, and I know at Aardman it was more organic, but the power of having a number of strong filmmakers, because we all get really close to what we're working on, and it's always helpful if we can set up a process of feedback, where you can get feedback from peers and from people that always impressed me in the story trust and in the brain trust, that people just set their own agenda aside and cleared a couple of days to help elevate your film, with asking nothing in return except that you do that for them when they're at that stage in their film, which is a huge thing to have. I think what would be interesting to hit a little bit, looking at the different kinds of questions, and to spend a little more time on very specifically, is what is the actual difference, especially to people who've done both, and maybe Sarah, we can start with you. What is the difference to you in developing for animation versus developing for live action?
Well, I mean, clearly live action people kind of live or die on their expertise with script. And I think a lot of people, a lot of really great talent in animation come from being animators or being artists. And literally they think in frames, they think in tiny, tiny sections. I mean, you know, Nick Park is someone like that. He starts by painting for a year and just doing images. And those people are hugely skilled and brilliant in the animation world, but they really sometimes struggle and they've never had an opportunity to work with script. And so animation has had a reputation of being not very good with script. And I definitely think that being good with script is a great shortcut through a lot of the kind of trouble that people can get into with animated films. You know, actually really knowing how to develop script is a big strength. At the same time, when I went to Aardman, I went in with my script skills and I did not understand what was going on in visual development. And I think the first impact, the first time it really hit me was because Aardman don't have an in-house visual development team. I just literally threw it open to the whole company. We just did it as a competition. And I said, hey, here are my characters. Here's the world. Anyone want to do some imagery? And about 70 people in the company, including the receptionist, who obviously has an art degree, all of them did imagery. And I suddenly realized that the movie could be the same movie telling the same story, but with radically different looks in terms of just the visual style, the design style. And that actually that design style is a key part of the IP that you're selling to a distributor. If you choose a slightly odd and esoteric look, it won't reach a giant audience. If you choose something cuddly and colorful, it may not reach teenagers. You know, it's like a key thing that a distributor is buying from you and that you have to have figured out. And figuring out that look of world takes as long as the iterations of a script. Right. So if you go and get a green light with a script and you haven't figured that out and you hire a design team thinking it's like live action, you're now just doing like sets and costume, you are in big trouble because it takes you a long time just to figure out the genre and the elements of your look before you then design the movie in that look. So that work is the same, but you have to have done a whole pre-bit of work on your art before you get there. And that is why, you know, it's super expensive. That's another big difference, right? I mean, in the independent producer world, I don't know what the average development budget is for a, you know, a live action feature in the indie world. I kind of have an idea in the UK, and it wouldn't buy you a round of viz dev, right? So, you know, just to be the nitty gritty, and I'm going to, you know, the animation development budgets, a healthy indie animation budget is like $3-4 million, and it's really hard to get those budgets out of anybody anymore. And you know, I don't know, and I'm not asking you to share trade secrets about how much gets spent on development in the major animation studios, but I know it's often way more than that because things can be around for a long time.
I think that's generally a good number. I think it would be good to stop and pause and define visual development, aka viz dev, and also story. You know, visual development is really the design of the whole show. It starts very much kind of pen to paper, but then you wind up modeling it in the computer. Everything of the world needs to be designed. It needs to feel like a coherent system. And then the storyboarding is such an integral part when we're saying that, like, you need to have, like, as Sarah was saying, you need to have these incredibly strong script skills. And then you need to be prepared for like 18 months, you know, like somewhere between like a year to 18 months of storyboard real iteration. And these are, so you have a writer and you have a producer and you have a director, and then you have also story artists who are interpreting the individual scenes, kind of like visual improvers. And they are plussing the scenes. I mean, one of the great things about animation is how global it can be, which means that it is relying on its emotional story at its core, but also like, how is the story visually being communicated? And the more visual, the more, we always say, like, if you should be able to turn the sound off. It's, in some ways, it's the opposite end of theater and television in terms of talkiness sometimes. But essentially those storyboard artists are a really important part of what would traditionally be a script iteration process in live action. And to my so far in my experience, everyone kind of feels coming from live action. I'll speak from my own experience. I totally forgot. I started in animation on The Tale of Despero. I found the manuscript, brought it to Disney. Disney passed, brought it to Universal. We did it at Universal, and I was working for a live action writer, director, producer, who was this amazingly established script doctor at the time. He's like, I'll just cut out the storyboarding experience because I'm an amazing screenwriter. And we, and then you have to really work the storyboarding aspect. You usually have like a team of somewhere, depending if you're an indie, like two storyboard artists, all the way up to like 6 or 12 if you're in crunch at a large studio. And this is separate from the animators. The animators are the actors, and the storyboard artists are the visual storytellers, or like the writer's room in a television series, the visual staff writers.
Yeah, basically, because animation is as expensive and you need as many people as we do, you try to get a movie you can believe in storyboard form. So we take the storyboards, we edit them, we do the voices, we do whatever. I got to be Grandma Tala, more, so my famous acting career was cut short by a real actor. And we put music, and you need to be able to actually see a movie. And it's amazing how much you can elevate before you start anything to do with actual animation. So in that world, it's sort of the cheapest, if you will, even though it's expensive. Part of our process is the smaller the group, the longer you can keep the small group. Story, art, and basically all the people who are needed, the editor, all the people that Sarah was mentioning, the better for you until you get to a point of this is the movie we want to make. Obviously, you need to back time that into creating what we call assets, which is the actual things in the computer that are going to be the characters and the worlds. And visual development can do even more than just visualize a script, right? If you're coming up with trying to solve some visual questions, some things that in words just aren't coming across, or everyone in the room has a different interpretation of what it can be, a good production designer can just catapult you into a different conversation. Does anyone else want to add on the live action versus animation? Because I think that's our biggest topic of questions. Aside from time, money, and the entire process, it's also insanely iterative. It's a major team sport, and there's very little that anyone can do by themselves. And we work together for a long time. It's a marathon. And so a lot of what we look for is team dynamics and how you can keep something in motion. It's, every one of us has focused on that quite a bit. Sometimes you get fabulous people, but they don't just kind of click together. Or another thing that happens a lot in animation is we start swimming, because you do get caught up in it. There's so many details, every single thing. That was, I think, the most shocking thing for me. My first animated film coming from live action was a short called Boundin' at Pixar. And I remember sitting in a meeting about the direction of the wood grain on the back gate of the truck that you see for like, I don't know, 9 frames, I don't know. And realizing, wow, okay, this is the level of detail, but it is made up of all those details. So
I think the other thing about the development process, and again, I'm just going to come back to my very indie perspective of like storyboards start after green light, so we kind of have development and then we have production, and it kind of, that's the cutoff point for me. But in the development piece, when I gave that very dry list that was a contractual list that we agreed, there's another meaning behind that list, and it is about the time that you are taking to get on the same page as your backers, as your financiers, your distributors, so they really get a vision of what you're going to be aiming at, of what the film will be like. And they get that from the script, but they also get that from all the artwork that you're showing them and the feeling of it. Because once you get into that production stage, the storyboarding, the animation and so on, the movie fragments into a million pieces that your studio cannot see. If they're not experienced animation people, if they are just a distributor, a financier, they can no longer see your movie. They see a million fragments and they all get the fear, right? Because they're going to live with that for about 2.5 years before it comes back together. It starts to look like a movie. And so that development time, doing that in a very thorough way, where you really figure out every aspect of your vision and you share it as illustratively as possible, it's in a way, it's what they hold on to in the dark nights before they can see your movie again. They remember that they loved that pitch and they remember what it felt like to be in that room surrounded by that artwork. And then you're showing them terrible bits of half-finished grayscale stuff for 1.5 years. So that's really important. You don't want to skip that. Otherwise, they'll get the fear really early and then you're in trouble.
Just on the storyboarding as well, I think working backward, having spent time in animation and then looking at live action films, I think the process of storyboarding, and to the extent that we do it in animation, there's a lot of great learnings for live action filmmakers in that process. And I know because we're also very much in the independent space and often have a lot of government funding coming in, because we often pick projects which are, we always pick projects which are IP, existing IP, just because that's a launch pad for us to be able to get a groundswell of interest, often in the projects that we want to do, and raising finance in that independent space. But beyond that, and bringing on funding partners and investors, what we do is spend quite a bit of time in storyboarding our film. We go to the effort of doing at least one round of voice recording with our key cast, even if we're going to come back and revisit our reel at a later point. We put effort into the music. We will put time into sound. We've really put a lot of effort into our story reel, so that at the end you actually do see a film. Yes, it's all hand-drawn storyboards, and that can be a little bit, I think, speaking to your point, Sarah, a little bit concerning for distributors who aren't always very used to seeing a film in 2D drawings. But it actually, when we talk with our funding partners, they're often saying, wow, if live action filmmakers had a chance to do a storyboard, you're effectively editing your film before you go out to shoot it. And so for us, we don't start animation because of the sort of budgets that we work in, which are usually between, say, 20 to 30 million US dollars. And in that budget range, we just can't afford to start working in animation, going into shooting in live action speak, until we are really convinced by the story reel. And sometimes I think for us in the independent space, you need to have a hard conversation with yourself, because you've got a budget, you're always up against it for time, but sometimes if that story reel is not where it needs to be, you have to be prepared to go back and rework, and that's what I think everyone's talking about when we say iterative process. You have to be able to go back and say, yes, we had best scripts, we were so happy, we were so convinced in our screenplay, but as it stands right now for the audience, there are things that are just not working. And so for us, that is such an incredible attribute of animation filmmaking that I think is, probably for a lot of live action people, a joy and a privilege to work with those sorts of artists who can realize such amazing and impactful art that is essentially storytelling, even before we've started animation. So that's something that we find very, I think, unique. Yeah.
I agree. And somebody's asking about, when we say iteration on the script, how often? Daily. The iterations on the script happen all the time. And sometimes you get writers who chose to be writers because they prefer to be alone in a room and then give you written stuff. They don't often thrive in animation, let me just say, because there's this constant feedback. It's also super fun. You're writing something down, it's being drawn by this brilliant artist, and storyboard artists are also picking angles and giving you emotion, and that feeds right back into the script. And then you go into recording session, which is our only spontaneous moment, is recording sessions. Everything else has to be pre-planned, and that feeds right back into the script. So it's a constant iterative process. The script, like I said, is never locked.
Yeah, and I would even add to that, it continues all throughout the schedule. So the 3 or 4 years, 5 years that you're working, it's all iterative down until delivery. Because each department, even after story, layout, animation, lighting adds to the process and adds to the storytelling. And it just becomes iterative all the way along.
And there's a process in animation where you can't start the next thing before you've done the thing before. So there's a constant, all the producers are nodding. There's this constant scheduling craziness of figuring out how to complete and move, and yet give yourself enough space to make changes because you've discovered something in effects that would want to go back to animation. But the budgets in animation are on the screen, they're labor. Sorry, Sarah.
No, sorry, my apologies. And I was going to say there's another difference there between live action and animation, and that is that although, I mean, how many iterations of script do you do before you try and get green lit? Well, enough that you really believe in it. But it is when you're going for a live action green light, that's your script. You're going to make that script. You don't necessarily expect, I mean, you might do some notes, right, before you go shooting, but you don't expect to do significant more drafts. So it's really important to have a really solid script that people believe in, but you don't necessarily need to get to your super final version. It's okay to start production with quite a big note that says, we don't think this whole section works. That's kind of okay. You've got time still to fix that, you know, because if you did everything, as you say, to your point, if you did everything one thing after the other, like all the script was perfect, and then it would take 10 years, right, to make one film. So you still have time to work on that script after greenlight. So that's again a difference between the live action mentality.
So let's get a little bit into, people are asking about real-time engines and different technologies and how they're affecting. And after that, we'll get back to, because I see quite a few questions about, so what do I need for a pitch deck? So how do we get one of these movies made? Which is a very fair question, by the way, in a producer's panel. So how are you finding, does anybody want to answer about the different technologies and how they're coming? For me, now at Baobab, I'm at a studio that's done a lot of virtual reality, we've done a lot of games, we've done a lot of, and we think about each project or each story in a sort of a 360. Where do we think it would fit best? And is there an application that we want to play in? Because we're sort of up on the interactive space and have expertise in games and virtual reality, we think that way about each project. So I think part of what the technology has allowed us, we think about books as well, written books, but part of what the technology has allowed us to do is to think about what's the best medium for this story. I know that some people who are working with real-time engines are working differently in development and getting way closer where they actually kind of, it feels more like live action, where they actually are making the movie, and then you know the movie you want and you get coverage, multiple camera coverage, and then you can edit it. I'm not convinced yet that the look is where we need it to be, but opening it up.
I'm happy to talk about our experience with the studios. We actually run fairly diverse animation workflow across our studio because we are both a specialist in very traditional form of what we kind of refer to as Western anime style, hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation, which is, by the way, quite expensive, just so everybody knows, but it looks incredible and it is a real craft. But in order to be able to create a kind of dynamism in the 2D animation, we're often looking for technology to start playing a role and saying, well, this is the sort of look, this is the kind of feel, the cinematic feel of this project. So how are we going to use various technologies, in this case virtual technology, early enough in our process to see how can we play with camera in a way that would allow 2D artists to be able to create very dynamic feeling animation. And so we've been able to use some virtual technology in the previous phase, which is when we use very low quality, I guess, assets like you talked about before. So we build a set essentially in a 3D space, and we start to use camera in a way that you would very similarly in terms of live action. And we have cinematographers like you would in live action. But for us in the 2D space, we're now spending a lot more time with hybrid technologies rather than just relying on one particular software. And then again, conversely, in the 3D space, we do a lot of 3D animation. Our studio is producing with Marvel What If, which is an animation that is CG 3D focused, but has a very sort of influenced in a lot of 2D traditional animation, hybrid techniques as well. So we try to look at our content and our studio process as being quite agnostic to software. And so we try to say, okay, what is the ultimate goal? What are we trying to achieve with this look? And because we have expertise across 2D all the way through 3D and virtual production, how are we going to use the softwares and the technology to achieve something that maybe we haven't seen before and that the audience hasn't seen before? And a lot of our clients and our partners and our distributors come to us for that, I guess, hybrid approach to producing and using our technologies in a way that may not be a traditional workflow. And I think every year it gets better. I'm sure we all think that every year what you can actually do in animation evolves. And I think virtual production for us is a tool in the filmmaking process, but it's not something yet that we would rely on 100% to produce, I guess, character animation for a high-end premium series or feature. So, but that's just our experience so far with the technology.
Somebody was asking about AI. I have zero experience with AI except all my artist friends going, I don't need to talk about it. So I don't really have much. So those of you who are in a position to solicit or approve or help develop, what do you look for in either a pitch or in a project? I wonder, Kevin, if you could kick us off.
Sure. I mean, I think we covered a lot of like what the key components are earlier. Just those are, I think, top of mind of what we looked for. But in terms of like the actual stuff, let's say you bring into a pitch, it can vary. Like a lot of times, you know, we'll animators that we've known for a long time and artists will come in and they'll have big ideas sort of already baked visually, with character designs and environment designs and color stuff. And then we can also go to writer, you know, take pitches from writers that have never done animation, and we'd be happy to just look at mood boards or, you know, a Pinterest page of things that you like and comps, because I think what we're looking for, all of that stuff is just to like display a tone. You know what I mean? Like that's being such a big thing. Like, what are the things that are like it, and or what are you trying to achieve? But for us, it's like just really understanding there's a core story there that could then lead us to understanding, okay, who's this for? Because we're doing a lot of different things now, just not just kids stuff. We're doing R-rated animated series and movies. So like trying to understand the demographic and who it's for is important. But all that to say, like, we don't really have a set standard in like, you have to come in with a log line and 3 acts figured out and know what the characters look like. It's really just being able to speak to like the essence of the idea, the tone you're going for. And like a big one, and I think somebody touched on it earlier, is really just like, why animation? Like that's probably the biggest question I have, especially coming out of the pandemic, when we started to hear a lot, like there was a certain point where animation was like the only gig in town, right? So we heard a lot of pitches from people that haven't worked in animation before, which was so exciting. And I encourage that. But one of the things we would always ask is like, well, are you bringing this to us because there's a real story to tell within this medium, or is this better suited for a live action picture? And it's just kind of coming to us because, you know, we're the people that are making stuff. So that is always like the biggest question. I touched on like personal, you know, personal relationship to the story, and then why animated is a big one. And then obviously we want to know who your characters are and how like unique they are, and the world you're putting them in, and how unique is that. But you know, for us, it's like, yeah, it's like tone, characters, and I will always just stress like knowing why you're telling the story in this medium and not live action is so important to us. So
How about
I
you,
hope that was
Maggie?
helpful.
Netflix.
I was getting kind of enthralled by the Q&A questions. I'm gonna just be honest about that. I was trying to kind of do double duty. I was agreeing with everything Kevin was saying. I was like, he's got it covered.
He's got it.
Good.
What do you look for? When people come in with a pitch, what do you look for? And I don't mean in this case, I think it would covered really well the kind of, I could come with a package that's everything from what Kevin just said, which is sort of a big idea and a mood board, all the way through to, you know,
why picture is
but what are you looking for?
Yeah, I'm going to start with saying, because I read some of the questions, you know, way back when, I don't know if anybody remembers the documentary Winged Migration.
Yes.
Really fabulous documentary. And I was at Disney at the time, and we were accepting pitches. We were open to the industry repped individuals to come up with pitches. And nobody came in and said, I just saw Winged Migration. I'm really inspired by birds. But I got like, I kid you not, like out of the blue, 35 bird pitches. So there is something about the zeitgeist. And like, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard talking pants, talking jeans stories, right? And I like the mouth was in different places, depending upon the audience. But, so my point being that it is really important to have representation. It can be a lawyer, it can be a manager, it can be an agent. It doesn't have to be all of them. They should have some industry standing. It cannot be the notary down the street who also has a law degree, necessarily, like, because there needs to be some sort of industry familiarity. All of you are here, so I hear that, but but representation functions to a certain degree as a filter, because we don't have medical school or law school, so the representation is a really important functional filter for seriousness. It is hard. I'm just kind of like straight talk for a moment. Like, we all live and breathe animation, to have individual, like, and just the way you all are specializing in your area, series versus features, people can cross over, but you have to bring the enthusiasm and the dedication, the same enthusiasm and dedication and curiosity you bring to all of your other projects to animation. Animation is not easier. And that is a bit, I think, of a myth.
Let's get that one straight.
Yeah. So I think that like right now we're working with in Netflix, we have a bunch of producers that come out of live action. We have companies, we have directors, and there are a few teams where it's like you can feel like this is their third project from the left, and we know it and we can see it. And then there's individuals who have like thrown themselves into it and are like, tell me about storyboarding. And then you put them in a room of storyboard artists, and it was just like what Barbara said. And it's like, you're watching all of your toys come to life, like weeks, like a week later, 2 weeks later. So the overarching umbrella process is long, but what you can experience in a short term is amazing. Someone also asked, like, it seems like all of the things that get greenlit, your series or features, have these incredible voice talent attached, or established filmmakers. Yeah, established filmmakers are valuable because they've been through it. Ed Catmull used to say, probably still does, that like directing an animated feature is like going crazy slowly. I think that's probably also true of live action. It's certainly true in animation. So to have someone who knows how to get through that process is incredibly valuable. And then what we're also doing to change the industry, I'm not answering your question, Osnat, but I'll circle back to it in a second, is then pairing different lived experiences and underrepresented groups who are going through this as the first time with some more experienced animation talent, a bit as kind of like ambassadors to kind of accelerate the change of who is telling the stories, which I think is incredibly important. So they're incredibly valuable. Actually, the voice cast usually comes in later.
Yeah.
Get very few projects. It's unlike live action. The talent attached is not important because, again, the animators are going to act the character. We need the voice, and it's easier to get an actor to agree to do an animated feature because they probably only have to record for like 10 days in their pajamas in a studio and not put any makeup on. So there is value in voice cast, but it's not necessarily the common starting point. It's really the idea. It's viability for animation. It's broad concept appeal, back to what Sarah was saying. And then the creative vision that Cristina was saying. And again, the do you want to just spend 3 years trapped in an elevator? That is the creative process with these people as well.
Hey, can I just touch on something Maggie said earlier? Because I think it relates to coming into the door with pitches. But when you were telling the story about wing migration and a bunch of bird stories and how people try to jump on things that are in the zeitgeist, because animation takes so long to make, it's not necessarily a topical game. So you're really looking for ideas that can be kind of evergreen and span, that will still be around and still be important in 4, 5, 10 years, however long it takes to make. That doesn't mean a bird story couldn't be popular 4 years later when it comes up, but I think it's less about trends, you know what I mean? It's more about universal stories. And then somebody was talking about how global now is a big thing, and people like Netflix, it's everything drops at the same time. We're all watching the movies, but I think there is an importance to not jumping on trends, because those will be gone by the time these movies get made. Even the quickest, most down and dirty indie movies still take a long time to make. So it's really tough. We're never looking for anything that's like of the moment. It's more of like what will last and what will progress ideas later down the road.
Well, what's the fastest everyone's done an animated film? I'm curious. From what stage? From development, like I have an idea, okay, go, we're gonna make this, we're gonna will this into existence, to release, or till picture lock to DI.
5 years.
Yeah, I'd say about the same.
We put one up pretty fast one time, and I'm not going to say what it is, but we probably wouldn't do that again, just because we were breaking our own rule about things in the zeitgeist, and we were trying to get something up fast, and it did very well for us, but it is very, very difficult. But yeah, lessons learned, especially if you want these things to have staying power. It takes a long time. 4 or 5 years is a nice, comfortable amount of time. And it is kind of short. You hear the stories about movies like Shrek, or even our own Hotel T took so long to get right. But, these movies deserve to have the best version of the story told.
I mean, there's something to be said about what the intention behind either the movie or a show it's supposed to be. Because right now, I think we're making the assumption that everybody wants to make movies that are going to stand the test of time and that are going to be mid to high budget and so forth. There is the example of South Park. It's not a movie, it's obviously a TV series, but that one, it is made in 6 days. Every episode is made in 6 days. So that's the extreme opposite of I think what we have been talking about. So something that is incredibly topical, it lives on the fact that is topical. It's produced in a cheap and dirty way, but obviously it still lives on great characters and great storylines. that's literally the opposite, but it is to show that anything can be done. It really comes down to what it is ultimately that you're trying to make and to achieve, and what is important from a storytelling perspective, and therefore like what type of method and process are you going to choose to achieve that. Sorry, I just
I agree. 7 Days to Air is a fantastic documentary, but then you look at what they do, it's like, you're right, that is the exception to the rule, but yes, they've set themselves technologically up to where they can pull that and turn it around. And those, the people that work on that show are the best in the game, and they're geniuses. And what's interesting is those, you can watch an episode from 6 or 7 years ago that was very topical and still kind of laugh about it because the execution is so good and those characters are so good, and we've all lived with them for 20 plus years too, right?
Absolutely. And they still manage, honestly, like to tell character stories that tend to be universal within the framework of like the topical element that they're gonna talk about that specific week, but it is definitely an exception to the rule.
It's a good one.
So we have about 20 some minutes left, so I want to make sure we hit on various questions. Thanks, Maggie, for answering a number of them. Somebody's asking about her boutique animation studio looking to grow our cachet. Do you see any benefit in creating a short film to that end? I'll start us off. I did short films at Pixar for a long time. I love short films, and I think it's a great medium. That said, it's not a commercial medium, and it's very hard to recoup, much less to make any money on it. Does it build? I can tell you what it will build is your ability to make movies, your pipeline, your whole. That's what Pixar did, and did it very successfully. It creates the ability to tell a story. And you know what? It actually isn't easy to make a great short film. It's that, what is it, Mark Twain or somebody, that quote of like, please excuse the long letter, I didn't have time to make it short. It's like really hard to tell a concise story that feels like a full short story rather than an anecdote. But is it worth doing? Yes, if you can get someone to fund it, absolutely. You'll learn a lot, and you'll show what your studio can do. That's my thought. Anybody wants to add to that, to the short film question?
We commission a short film for emerging talent in our studio every second year, and we do it as exactly for the reason that you mentioned, that it's a really good safe way to go through the process of directing and working holistically with your team when you perhaps you've come out of storyboarding or animation and so on. So we do offer it in that kind of paradigm as that really good development, career development, and often if we're trying to test a different workflow or technical development process. I would have to say what you said before in terms of funding a short film. It's very hard to get the budget that you need in order that you would say this is as good as we can do in our studio. And so if you're relying on a short to be that good, that this is the standard of our studio, you're going to be spending a lot of money on that. I would probably say as a boutique studio, I would be looking for partners, maybe some of the people in this room, but looking to work as partners on a project which has a good budget that allows you to spend time and money on perfecting your animation and specializing maybe if there's a particular style of animation that you do. And we found that going through the bid process with different studios, that process often paid, which is great, depending on the sort of project, but at least that really does give you maybe more of a chance at kind of getting more exposure and that kind of, I think, perhaps becoming a little bit more credible, using that word again, in that sort of more premium space. So that's a strategy we employed probably about 10 years ago, and it worked really well for us. But we do love short films, like you said. It's actually a really fun process. And often for our team, it's just a really cathartic thing to do because it's a huge 3-year, project where, you're living and breathing one story for that period of time, and you can actually, give yourself a little bit of diversity in the work that you're doing. So yeah, that's how we use them.
You also can take risks. You can take a lot of creative risks in a short film and make some amazing statements that you may not be able to make in a feature. There's quite a few questions, or a number of questions about animated documentaries. Does anybody want to jump in? One question is, do you see big studios releasing animated documentaries? Do you think that would likely remain in the indie space? Another question is sort of how you develop it. Animated docs. I don't have any experience in animated. I watch them. I love them, but I haven't worked in it. Does anybody? I don't think any of us have been
I
in
think
that
it's going to be
space.
an indie thing. It's an indie space thing.
It's a very indie space, and it's, you know,
I don't think there are any major distributors out there looking for
no, it's
animated
when you
docs.
have a
It's
story.
really hard at the moment. Animation, it's a really sucky time to be a bit depressing about in animation development, because animation was hit by the pandemic, and you know there's a quite a lot of caution. There's an abundance of caution everywhere in the film industry, right? And especially around animation, I would say right now.
I think it's been really effective with like
Difficult stories.
Flea and Persepolis, like very difficult stories.
How about Waltz with Bashir? They kind of started.
Yes. Like I'm so thankful that the art form has helped tell stories that I think would otherwise be harder for us to look at and to communicate the emotion with honesty. But it is those are few and far between, and really also very filmmaker and personal experience dependent.
Yeah, just back on the short, somebody said Pixar has the Spark Shorts program. We were doing shorts at Disney Animation Studios, and really it was primarily, aside from the theatrical shorts, these shorts there were very clear parameters. There was a certain amount of time that an artist could have to focus on it, and then we all would jump in to help. So they were like side projects, but it was, I think it helps everyone's day job to be a filmmaker, to sometimes get the whole picture. You understand so much better how you fit into the picture, no matter what your part in it is. So I think, and plus it's just creatively satisfying, because it's just about peers working together. So it is worth doing, but it ain't cheap.
Sorry, can I add one thing about the animated documentaries that just occurred to me? Like one thing that I also wanted to, first of all, plus one to what Maggie said and Sarah said. I think like with documentaries, it's even more important to think about why you're choosing animation as a medium specifically. For two reasons. One, the documentary space is already a space that is that has like budgets that are significantly lower than the scripted space and the animation space. And animation tends to be a little bit expensive. And so like this leads me to the second reason, which is animation does have a barrier of entry in terms of how people perceive it, right? Like depending on what the visual execution of a piece looks like, you may cut a percentage of your audience if they don't consume animation, if they don't find what they see appealing, you're gonna lose them. And so with documentaries, given the limitations that you're starting with, you really need to have a compelling reason, I think, like to use animation. And I would also like really think deeply about what is clever way to bring on board some visionary production designers that can figure out a way to create an aesthetic and a style that is easily achievable, and that is also beautiful and like visually appealing while being simple and elegant. So I just wanted to throw it out there, because I think like the concept of like just doing animated documentaries in general maybe doesn't stand on its legs and really has to be justified.
Someone's asking, as a writer, can you just sell a script for animation without sticking around for the entire development process?
We try.
A good question.
I just want to, I think there's one thing that it might be worth considering, which is like the very first question. If you, I'm guessing that some of the people who are watching this are live action producers, maybe with a great idea or a piece of IP, who are going, well, I'd like to do this in animation. Would it be easy? Would it be cheaper? Or, you know, it would be great in animation. I think you have to think really carefully about what your relationship is, you want your relationship to be to the project. If you really want to be the producer of an animated film, firstly, are you going to set up your company to be an actual studio? Because that's what it takes. You need a studio. I think people think they can contract the making of the film out to some third-party vendor, like a, you know, Double Negative or whatever. They don't do the first half, the creative part of that job. You have to be the creative studio. That's a huge piece of admin that you will never have done before, like just to set up that infrastructure. So is that really what you want? Because you will be giving 3 or 4 years of your life to doing that, which is not the rhythm that most live action producers operate, right? Or do you want to sell that project to an animation studio? Or do you want to take it into a Skydance or a Sony that actually have an animation studio that might then take it and make it for you, and you have some exec relationship to it? I think there are big questions about your motivation, what you actually want out of the process. Because it, you know, I have the scars, like setting up independent studios and putting together those teams of world-class people and all the infrastructure that goes with that is an enormous job. I mean, it's up to and including moving whole families across the world and putting their kids in school for 2 years. You know, it's like a very big piece of admin to do it. And most people probably have creative interest in this project could be a great animation. So I think you want to think really carefully about your partners. Do you want to partner with existing animation studios? Or do you want to sell your idea into, you know, a producing studio? Or what is it you actually really want out of this process? And if you really think you want to make an animated movie, you should have a drink with somebody on this panel. And then after about 2 hours, where they tell you the war stories, if you still want to do it, come on in.
Absolutely, because we have great snacks.
Animation has good snacks.
Our Secret Santa or winter holiday gift exchanges are usually really on point and fabulous and creative because everyone can craft. And it's just a really darn nice group of people, I've got to say. So I love that. Come on over. I think writers have been the easiest group to be transient, kind of between formats, live action, and whatnot. And I think producers can find really great homes too here with us, in particular. Or if, you know, you're an editor, you love iteration, you know, you want to move into the space. So many of us started in live action, but then this kind of becomes our forever home, so to speak.
So you're probably wondering to yourself, after everything they've said tonight, why the hell do they love this medium so much? But we do. Actually, I thought maybe, are there any more burning questions that we didn't get to? You guys want to retype it? If so, would you please retype it in the Q&A section? Aside from if we love cats. Thank you, Julie. I think there was one question that we didn't address, which is somebody was asking if a feature takes about 5 years, how long does the series take? Does anybody want to?
I think it depends on.
Oh,
sorry.
I was just saying I'm on my first series, so I don't know how long.
If it's limited series, is it a big volume? I think it can be really variable. Yeah, I mean, something like What If is a very long schedule. It's kind of closer to a feature schedule. If you're doing comedy, like we said before, something like South Park can be done pretty quickly, just depending. 2D versus 3D. There's just so many, there's just too many variables to say. But, you know, generally speaking, I think one of the questions was about, you know, even in this, looking at series, do, you know, the directors stick closer to the script than they would in features. And one of the answers I gave here was just that, in fact, we've worked on projects where there might just be an outline, and then you're actually spending a really, you know, often for comedy, you're doing boards, and then you come back to dialogue. And in fact, I learned recently that's actually how Bluey is created. But so there's definitely a very variable element to series production, which is can actually be done in a completely different way to how we approach movies. So, sorry,
I also
Christine.
think. Oh, sorry, Christina.
Go ahead, Kevin. I can speak after. Don't worry.
I was just saying, you know, there's also two kind of schools of thought, and it's probably evolved since, because television in general, but also animation television, is so wild and different. So many things can be done, limited series, whatever. But for a long time, there's always two schools of thought. Is it what we considered a writer-driven show, or is it what you considered a board-driven show? And it just depends on, like, really how that, you know, what the determination is there. I would say, to my experience, having just done the Elvis show that I produced, that was very much a script-driven show. We did like kind of a traditionals writer's room. It was all over Zoom, so all done in the pandemic. But it's very much driven by the script, and we stuck to those scripts pretty well. And then our board artists executed and lifted and did everything. But that would be something that's a lot more stick to the script. And because of schedules and budgets that are different, and you don't really have the luxury of that time, I learned as I made this, somebody from feature experience being like, oh, wait, this is the box I have to work in TV. Anyway, knowing that, making it very script driven and knowing what we wanted, and then just heightening the visuals and the acting and the execution and animation. That was how we approached that show. But a show like SpongeBob SquarePants could be completely different, where it's just, here's an outline and let's just let the board artist go. So, Christina, sorry.
No worries. And honestly, like Barbara and you, Kevin, covered what I was gonna say, so nothing to add to that.
Somebody's asking, is virtual production increased that increased during COVID? Does that remain? In my experience, absolutely. Where everyone is way more used to it. Our tools are strong. I think I was in the middle of producing Raya and the Last Dragon. We had 2 shots animated when the pandemic hit. So we got to experience the whole thing, you know, oh my God, we're going home for 3 weeks, still home. So I think we all learned a lot, and it wasn't the technology that wasn't the issue, at least not at Disney. That was solved very quickly, strong teams. I think the things that we had to learn the most about was the story room was the hardest thing, not being there in person with a board and putting things up on the board. And for me as a producer, feeding people, I hate that I can't feed people in remote work. So that's just my own thing. But I think we've all gotten a whole lot better with it. And it allows us to also include all sorts of other voices. You don't have to sit in the 818 area code in Los Angeles. I just moved back up to the Bay Area because it's possible, because we can all work remotely. So I think so. I don't know what you guys experienced, but I think everyone's nodding in agreement.
We noticed a big difference in terms of kind of exactly what you were saying, Osnat. The teams that knew each other, that had an opportunity to work together, had a great working relationship on Zoom. But the teams that we had sort of just put together and were still figuring out how to work with each other really struggled during the pandemic. Just that, you know, not having that ability to be in person they had additional communication and working collaboration challenges.
Yeah, I know for us, one of the things we did was, this is the first time for me working on the last year of a movie where we had a really nice work-life balance, because by 6:30 your brain turns to mush if you're looking at Zoom. So we ended at 6:30. Me, the directors, we actually had dinner with our families during the end of production, which was amazing. But we had a lot of homework. But the thing that it taught us to do that I really like, that I keep trying to find again with every team, is that we started creating very clear briefs. It's like very clear marching orders. And when the movie ended and we were wrapping our animators, they're all talking about feeling so trusted. more trusted than they'd ever felt before in a film. Part of that was necessity. But part of that is something you want to do. There were less iterations, there was less noodling, there was a lot more giving space, and from that, the work, I think, was elevated. So yes, there's some pluses, but
it also just challenges the Western mindset
Yeah.
that I think we can all default to in this awesome way, in these like really indescribable small ways that I definitely don't want to go back to anything different than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. All right.
We found that there has been some issues for us on the studio side, because you're essentially having to double the kind of equipment that you have as a tech cost to doing this, and because we also need to work in really secure environments, so security has become an issue because there's a lot of people working in personal, at home, and so to the extent that you need to consider that, particularly when you're working on really big projects that people go through your trash to find out some kind of information to leak. It's, there's some thinking around how to do that. And for 2D animators who draw and are working in a remote setting, they'll often draw and have to wait a beat before they can see the line that they're drawing. So, there's definitely been challenges in that regard, but I think, technology, like always, catches up really quickly. And so I agree. I think the hybrid working format for us has delivered so much more benefit for the studio as a whole. And so, yeah, we'll continue to work that way for as long as we can.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I thought maybe we could do a very quick round robin of here's the one thing I would have wanted. Here's one thing I'm telling myself when I first entered animation. Just top of mind. Here's what I would have wanted to know. Anybody?
For me, visual development, what visual development meant and why it mattered.
I go back to the creator vision. Like I started in Italy, like I was in a studio that had never done animation before. And we had a way of working on animated projects that was very manufactured, as opposed to having like a real creator vision behind. And so it took like a few years of, learning by making mistakes that we could have avoided probably. So I know it's simple, but it is something that I think it's very, very, very important.
I'll say for me, it's like learn everything you can about everything that everybody does. There's 400 names at the end of an animated film, and better understanding all of that is only going to help you, because you understand like what each of those little things bring to the table in terms of making the whole. And if you want to be in development, you kind of need to know like what those various departments and artists are going to add to the process, and it'll make you see the movie a little bit better.
I think for me, as an independent producer, I think in the earlier days, going to a market where you're meeting a lot of people, meeting lots of buyers and distributors, and it's a very exciting time. But one of the things I think I wish I knew more about at the time was that I'd spent more time researching what's working where, and knowing, okay, what is Netflix doing that works, and that, and what is Disney doing, and understanding perhaps how my content or the things I'm pitching would be in harmony with things that are going on there, or, and I think just understanding who, your audience, number one, because that's ultimately, the consumers who's going to enjoy your content. But then I think because in our industry, everything is going to be channeled through people, some of the people on this panel who have expertise in understanding what's working for audience. I think really that knowledge is so important. So being able to listen and understand, okay, what is working for you? What kind of content, rather than assuming maybe that your idea is going to trump whatever else is going on with audiences around the world. And of course, there's always one idea that does and breaks the rule. And I know when Arcane dropped, like our whole studio just went completely crazy over it because it was so incredible. And Spider-Verse, someone mentioned, there are projects that just completely rise to the top and may not have been an obvious, commission even. But I think, yeah, for me, coming into this industry, really recognizing the expertise in programming, commissioning, buyers, distributors is important.
Maggie, Holly, any words to add?
I was just gonna go back to kind of what we said at the beginning. Like the collaborative process has really been such an amazing thing to be able to participate in, but being flexible and being able to manage change is key for me.
Yeah.
I think, I think for me, the shock of being in rooms with some of the smartest people I've ever met, friends of whom are landing things on Mars, and they're figuring out for us how to do hair that curls and dump. It's so humbling, mind-boggling that it's worth it all. Thank you all. Thank you, this incredible panel of super smart people. Thank you so much. And thank you all for sticking with us. This was really fun. Thanks, PGA, and thanks, BAFTA.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Bye.